into a matrix multiplication, where each neuron's activation is just the row of weights multiplied and summed by the column of activations from the previous layer, and then added to the bias and squished using the sigmoid. Matrix operations will be extremely important once we get into something called convolutional neural networks, which can detect actual patterns and trends within the images. That's all the mathematical tools you'll need for a neural network: adding, multiplying, matrix operations, nonlinear functions like the sigmoid. So now, the question stands: how do we make all of this using something as unconventional as DNA? Isn't DNA just some molecule that makes up life? How does one go from that to neural networks? What you're about to see here is a transistor made out of DNA. First, let's take a look at the properties of DNA as a material. What are the rules behind how DNA interacts and functions? What can we explain? You're probably familiar with this representation of DNA, the classic double helix. A pairs with T and G pairs with C. For simplicity, I'll represent this a little more abstractly as two straight strands. This isn't the only form of DNA though. You can separate the double strands into single strands. However, the instant you do this, the DNA will try to snap back together like magnets. A and T are like magnets with opposite poles. The same applies to G and C. Any other arrangement is unfavorable and makes the attraction between the strands weaker. We can say that A base pairs with T and G with C. Any two sequences that can base pair with one another are called complementary sequences. One quirk of DNA is that the ordering of the letter bases matter, and it is signified using this arrow. This is important because base paired DNA strands run anti-parallel with one another. If we have a complementary sequence but in the incorrect direction, they won't base pair properly. Keep this in mind when designing anything related to DNA. All of this leads up to the essence of DNA computing. Similar to how opposite pole magnets attract one another spontaneously, DNA wants to maximize the number of base pairs it can make to any given strand spontaneously. Let's test our understanding of this principle. Let's say you have two strands of DNA. There's only one region in these two that are complementary, like what you see here. What's going to happen? By all means, try to figure this out on your own. It's a very good exercise for your intuition. And if your answer is that they only bond where they're complementary, you're spot on. Like I said, DNA will try to make as many base pairs as possible, so this arrangement you see here is better than nothing. Similarly, if you have one strand here and there are two regions that are complementary on one strand, they'll spontaneously try to form base pairs and form this structure called a hairpin loop. This is actually the start of the 3D computing paradigm I alluded to earlier, so stay tuned for that. Now, we can get started on using these in creative ways to make our DNA computer. Let's return to the somewhat mismatched DNA we have for my first question. If we introduce a new strand that is much more complementary to one of the strands than the other, what do you think is going to happen? Remember the same golden rule: maximize base pairs. So the strand will actually ditch its old partner for a better one. And by shifting our view a little bit, this is basically a switch. The strand we put into it is our input, and the strand that pops out is the output. This type of reaction is called DNA strand displacement, or DSD for short. The part where the input DNA attaches first is called the toehold domain, and the displacing part is called, well, the displacement domain. And there you go, that's a basic buffer switch. But the transistor that we want isn't just a switch, right? It's a switch that only turns on based on a signal. Designing the transistor basically uses the same principles and ideas as the switch. The DNA will try to make as many base pairs as it can. We're going to have to be a little bit more clever because it needs both inputs to activate and not just either one of them. See these two sequences? You'll need both of them to make it send out an output, which is this strand at the end here. Let's explore this design. To push out the output, the logical answer might be to use the big one to push it out. If the big one tries to attach, it won't work. since the patterns don't fully match and it is happy the way it is. But when this yellow one attaches, it is a perfect match for its complement, so it won't be taken out. As you can see, neither one is sufficient to send out the output. And with this yellow sequence, there are two complementary sequences in there, so it collapses into a hairpin. And once it does, that's when the other input can bind and displace the output. You need both to generate an output. This isn't just a transistor, it's also an AND gate. Of course, there are way more gates than the AND gate, so we'll explore more DNA logic gates in the next video. Now, I might have just said that this is an innocent digital AND gate, but it can act as a multiplier too. To understand how this works, let's take a look at a very simple reaction. A plus B makes AB, where AB is just one molecule. If there's 50A and 20B, you can make only 20 of AB, since if you run a B, you can't physically make more of AB. Back to our AND gate, we can do the same. Add in 50 units of the input, and there will be 50 of the gates. And you can dump in however much of the other input you want. Let's just call this state high or 1. Then we'll be able to generate 50 of the output. This is 50 times 1 equals 50. We'll go into detail how to do math using DNA in its own video, but the upshot is that we can design circuits that can compute polynomials. And with polynomials, we can calculate any function we want, as most functions can be approximated using the Taylor series. Functions such as the sigmoid, our final piece of the puzzle. And there you have it, that's all the components you need for a neural network. But neural networks are huge, so you're going to need to know how to implement matrices into DNA. I'll show you the full numerical version in the following videos, but here's a Boolean version as a teaser. Let's make a small modification to the DNA strand displacement reaction I showed you earlier. We can chop up the toehold and displacement domains and add a linker. You need both pieces to activate the gate now. This way, we can make a clever system that can select which number targets which. And this ability is crucial for matrix multiplication. Let's strip down matrix multiplication down to its essence. You multiply the row and the column element-wise, and then sum them together. In Boolean terms, you AND these two pairs together, and then OR the result. These DNA will pair up only if the connectors are complementary. This represents an AND operation. If either one of these pairs are actually paired, it can interact with this gate to push out an output. This is the OR operation. So let's try multiplying this matrix with this vector for demonstration. And as you can see, the DNA results match that of the Boolean calculation. And that's it. That's a brief overview of how we can make all the components of a DNA computer. We went from exploiting the properties of DNA to create switches and transistors, and I gave you a glimpse of the arithmetic and logical prowess of these little molecules. We'll go into the depths of these operations in the next two videos. Then we'll combine these two into a DNA neural network and finally attach it to a living cell. So stay tuned and join me in this quest of a whole new and exciting paradigm of computation. Thank you immensely for watching. Why are we teaching living cells how to do math? Seriously, why are we torturing these poor cells into doing something so unnatural? Silicon computers can already do this, so why reinvent the wheel? You could have used them to do very productive things, such as making essential drugs, using them as test platforms to understand the deeper workings of biology, but math? Why? And another part of you might be wondering, how do we actually torture the cells into doing math? It doesn't even matter if there's no real use for this, there's just this itch you want to scratch. How is it that we humans need a brain to do math, but these cells just need a few of their buttons? There's just this part of you that wants to create man-made horrors beyond your comprehension, isn't it? Be honest with me. And well, today, I'm going to tell you that these viewpoints aren't in contrast at all. In fact, you'll see soon in this video, by playing with the building blocks of biology, we can use the insights gained from that to create some fascinating things that might even give computers a run for their money. So, I present to you how scientists managed to teach a glob of cells into doing the very basics of math, adding numbers, and why this man-made horror is actually the basis to the future of biology. This is what happens when you apply engineering to biology. Let's get started. We're teaching cells to add numbers, but how do we even add numbers using traditional logic gates? If you already know this, feel free to skip to the next part, otherwise this will be a pretty quick review. Computers work in base 2, 1 representing on and 0 representing off. In base 2, 1 represents 1 and 0 represents 0, duh. And just like in base 10, when you count beyond 9, you write 1, 0, 10. But in base 2, when you count to 2, you write 1, 0. 3 will be 1, 1, and so on. There is nothing special about base 2 or base 10, they're just representations of the same thing. You can still add, subtract, multiply, divide, and so on. When we're adding numbers in base 2, we just take down the smaller digit as our sum and carry the higher digit to the next digit. And then we'll repeat this until we run out of digits, just like in base 10. To accomplish this, each digit requires 3 inputs. 1 from the first number, 1 from the second number, and a carry input from the previous digit. The output of this computation is the lower digit of the sum, known as the sum, and the higher digit called the carry, which the carry value can be plugged into the next digit, and we just compute until we run out of digits. This is in essence what a full adder is. It is achievable using this logic circuit. But how do we even teach a cell to perform this? It's not like it has logic gates built into it. And at this point, longtime viewers of my channel are probably smiling right now because cells are full of logic gates. If they weren't, then they won't be able to make decisions to save their lives. If there is okay food, then, well, digest the okay food. But when there's better food, then don't bother. In terms of logic, digest okay food when there is okay food, and not when good food is available. While logic can manifest in various ways in biology, in this video, we'll focus on the ones that can't be encoded in DNA. DNA holds the instructions that are transcribed into RNA, which in turn is translated into proteins. These proteins are like the workhorses of the cell. If the DNA is the code, then the proteins are the actual functions that get executed. Go watch this video for a deeper dive into this process. Of course, not all functions need to be executed simultaneously. The transcription stage can be controlled using something called transcription factors, which are often proteins themselves. And within this scheme, there is one feature that can lead to a domino effect that will cause the way we design logic circuits in biology to diverge heavily from their transistor cousins. See if you can spot it. Be sure to let me know in the comments. And now, at the transcription layer, we can start building the logic gates. First, let's create a sensor using a transcription factor that blocks transcription until a specific input chemical is detected. This serves as the basic buffer you've often seen in logic diagrams, allowing us to receive the input of the system. Next up, we can craft a NOT gate using a similar approach, but this time, the transcription factor enhances transcription instead of blocking it. To revert this, just add the specific chemical to that transcription factor, halting the transcription process. To build an AND gate, we require 2 transcription factors to join together to enable transcription. This way, the gate's output is activated only when both of the inputs are present. We don't have to build these ourselves. Most of the parts you see here are borrowed from bacteria, such as the buffer vanilla sensor as you can see here. So far, we've covered a sensor, a NOT gate, an AND gate. Now, let's move on to how we link these gates together. Remember, the transcription factors are also proteins, and we can use this to our advantage. Instead of having the output be any generic protein, we can make it another transcription factor, specifically the one that can activate the other gate down the line. And to illustrate that, here's a simple and not gate. It only activates when there is the red chemical and not the blue chemical. Let's connect the light red sensor to the bluish pink transcription factor as the buffer, and let's connect the blue sensor to output the dark red transcription factor as a NOT gate. If the light red chemical is present, then the gate is lifted and we can make the bluish pink protein. But if you remember from earlier, that's not enough to activate our AND gate. Now, if the blue chemical isn't present, then we can make the dark red protein. And only now can we activate the AND gate. You can see that in this mechanism, we need both of these transcription factors to activate the gate. As for building an OR gate, we can connect the transcription factors in a clever way. By making the output of the two gates the same, when either of them are activated, the subsequent gate is triggered, creating the OR logic we desire for just a few extra components. You can see, if either the buffer or the NOT gate are active, the whole gate is active since they output the same light gray transcription factor. We can take this trick to the next step and obtain an extra AND gate for free. Here's how. This circuit over here works exactly the same as our old AND gate. Two transcription factors are needed for it to activate, but only with one twist. We can engineer one of the proteins to be unable to bind when a certain chemical is present, effectively introducing the NOT aspect and a free AND gate. Feel free to go back and look at these mechanisms again. There are a lot of moving parts, but the upshot is the wires between the gates are transcription factors, and the gates themselves are encoded in the DNA sequence. However, there's one gate that is elusive in biology. That's the XOR gate. Building this is quite nifty in biology, but don't worry, we can just do the same thing as an XOR gate using AND or AND. So there we have it, the sensor, the NOT gate, AND gate, the OR gate, and a workaround for XOR gates. Great, we can start building the full adder now. This isn't that hard. Or is it? Imagine constructing a circuit with wires, but each time you need connection, you have to use a different color of wire. To make matters worse, there are only limited colors available. Sounds absurd, right? Well, that's precisely the predicament faced by biological logic gates. In biological circuits, each wire represents a transcription factor. Using the same transcription factor more than once forces connections between the gates that may not align with our intention. What we used to our advantage to build the OR gate now works against us. And it doesn't end there. If we keep using more and more types of transcription factors, we'll eventually run out of available types. This limitation further compounds the complexity of our tasks. But that's not all of our worries. Even when using different types of transcription factors, they can sometimes cross-talk with one another. As a chemical system, unforeseen reactions can occur, causing interference and disrupting the precise functioning of our logic gates. On top of everything, the sensors we borrowed from bacteria were designed for the bacteria-specific needs. They didn't evolve alongside the human cells we're now working with. This mismatch introduces additional challenges in this already delicate process. All of these factors combined make biological computation seem almost impossible. It feels like our hopes and dreams are about to be crushed to smithereens. How do we recover from this seemingly insurmountable blow? Is there a way out of this maze of limitations and challenges? In a remarkable twist, the answer lies within us, within the realm of multicellular organisms. Instead of relying on a single cell to perform all the functions, we can harness the power of multiple cells with diverse capabilities working together. In our case, we have 9 distinct cells, each equipped with their own logic circuit, collaborating as a full adder. By embracing this ingenious principle, we can swiftly address one of the 3 problems. Since each cell acts as a closed container, cells using the same transcription factor won't interfere with one another. This allows us to reuse the same color of wire multiple times. Additionally, we can borrow from biology and employ hormones to facilitate communication between cells. This enables us to selectively share the wires between the cells while keeping others contained within each cell. Who knows, maybe this approach can amount to something even more than adding bits. However, our journey is not without challenges. Building and optimizing a complex network of 9 different cells poses difficulties in testing and troubleshooting. How can we identify the cause of failure if it occurs? Drawing inspiration from engineering, we adopt a step-by-step approach, developing and testing smaller components individually, refining them until they function effectively, and then putting it all back together. Let's tackle the next obstacle: incompatible parts sourced from different organisms. Surprisingly, we can modify the transcription factor proteins to incorporate segments from other proteins. It's akin to integrating a piece of code that resolves compatibility issues between the functions of the libraries. We can just take a human part and fuse it with a bacterial part. As mentioned earlier, it's crucial to test if this actually works. In this case, we encounter a persistent signal where the gate should be up. If the signal propagates through our circuit, it can be amplified and lead to undesired outcomes. The solution to this challenge is kinda captivating. We encode a probability of self-destruction in the RNA form of the code, using something called a hammerhead ribosome, a small RNA loop that cleaves the RNA into fragments. And you can clearly see the results improve. In biology, the code not only governs protein function, but can also serve as the function itself as well. This field of using nucleic acids at computers holds great fascination, and I might just delve into it in a future video. It's worth noting that the concept forms from the foundation of the intriguing RNA world hypothesis. Now, let's address the final issue of crosstalk. We can employ a technique resembling a confusion matrix, testing every chemical against every transcription factor. Even with just a few components, crosstalk occurs, such as the blue signal interfering with the yellow one. However, instead of avoiding it like usual, we can leverage the gate's ability to amplify signals by feeding the weaker signal into another gate. We can amplify it. And here are some results to boot. And that's it. That's all 3 problems solved, stemming from the simple principle of employing multiple cell types. We've accomplished our goal. Though, there are more challenges to address and solve, but this will make the video convoluted and really long, so the link to the paper for this work is linked in the description. And there you have it. That's how you build an adder circuit using cells. But now the question arises, why the heck did we just do that? Is there anything beyond just adding numbers using cells? All of this serves as a proof of concept for cell-based therapeutics. Imagine cells capable of logically computing the production of specific protein drugs upon detecting certain diseases or markers. By exploring and constructing a simple system like this, we laid the foundation for developing more complex systems in the future. Without the essential intuitions gained through this process, building such intricate systems would prove immensely challenging. Furthermore, what we've done here offers a way to create simplified models of complex biological processes. Adopting a mathematical and engineering mindset, we construct toy models to gain deeper insights into the workings of the real thing. By playing with these models, we enhance our understanding and we can apply our knowledge to create new advancements. These creations, in turn, become the toys for others to explore. This iterative loop propels us towards designing better and more sophisticated bioengineering components. Thus, our story begins with the quest to build computers using life. In the next episode, we'll be taking the leap from arithmetic to something even more profound. But for now, thank you immensely for watching. Why did the bacteria cross the road? Well, that's because it can't see red and green lights, duh. That would probably make them very bad self-driving cars though. But what if I told you there was a way to control these bacteria using a bit of engineering? The more you look into it, the more you might find that these tiny organisms share a very interesting trait with something that us humans have also made: the PID controller. Coincidence? Intellectual theft? Maybe a little bit of both. It's a mystery we'll solve together. So join me as we uncover why and how a man-made invention like a PID controller shows up in bacteria of all places. And at the end of it all, we'll hack these bacterial controllers into doing something really cool. let's get started. Diving into something closer to our daily lives, drones are an excellent example of systems that utilize PID controllers. If we are to unravel this mystery, we must become familiar with our prime suspect. Consider this section as a briefing to help us identify the culprit. Specifically, in bacteria, the controller we're dealing with is just one component of the PID system, the I, or integral controller. Drones, for instance, need to maintain a stable hover position against the downward force of gravity. Without the integral controller, the drone would find itself in a constant struggle between gravity and its propellers. It would be trapped between its starting point and the desired altitude, resulting in what engineers refer to as steady state error. If we were to plot the distance to the target over time, most controllers would simply see a flat line and consider the job done. But not the integral controller. It takes the area under that flat line and accumulates it, translating that accumulation into the motor's effort. The accumulation eventually builds up, allowing the motor to break free from the trap. Thus, the integral controller operates by exerting effort based on the accumulated error over time, making it highly effective in addressing steady-state errors. Remember this. Now that we have identified our culprit, let's investigate the crime scene. Bacteria require energy to survive. They lack the ability to perceive red or green lights or even hear the sound of car engine for that matter. In fact, they can't even see. Instead, bacteria possess the remarkable capability to move towards sources of food based on chemical signals, a process known as chemotaxis. Chemo meaning chemical and taxis meaning movement. However, like many aspects of life, there are complications involved, particularly in the